In the spring of 1985, the city of Los Angeles, vast, restless, and alive,
the panic that swept the county was enormous.
People didn't know if they were going to live to see the next morning.
Was about to confront something it could not understand and could not control.
The suspect has used guns, knives, tire irons.
I knew how vicious and violent he really was.
It began quietly. A single call, a routine dispatch. At 10:40 p.m. on March 17th, a homicide detective with the LA County Sheriff's Department was sent to what sounded like another ordinary crime scene. One dead, one wounded. Nothing unusual, at least not yet. But the moment he stepped inside, the illusion of routine vanished.
We entered the location on Village Lane. Dale Okazaki was lying on her back in the kitchen. She had sustained a gunshot wound to the head.
A young woman lay motionless in the kitchen. She had been unloading groceries when a man entered her apartment and executed her without hesitation. No struggle, no warning, just violence, sudden and absolute. Nearby, her roommate had also been shot at close range. Somehow, she survived. She couldn't identify the attacker. Nothing had been stolen. No motive, no pattern, no sense. Just silence and blood. At first, it looked like a random act. Maybe a robbery gone wrong, maybe something personal. But then, less than an hour later, it happened again. Another woman, another attack, different location, same weapon. Shot at close range while driving home. That was the moment investigators realized this wasn't coincidence. It was the beginning of something far worse. Over the next several days, Los Angeles remained unaware of what was unfolding beneath the surface. Life continued as normal. People went to work. Children went to school. Families slept peacefully behind unlocked doors. But 10 days later, the illusion shattered. On March 27th, an elderly couple was found murdered in their home. The husband had been shot in his sleep. The wife had not been so fortunate. She had been stabbed repeatedly, brutalized, mutilated, and something else, something deeply disturbing, marked the scene. A souvenir had been taken. Not money, not jewelry, something far more personal. Something meant to be remembered. Investigators understood immediately. This was no longer random. This was ritual.
What made the case even more unsettling was the inconsistency. Serial killers, as understood at the time, followed patterns. They used the same method, the same weapon, the same approach. But this killer? He changed everything. Guns, knives, blunt force, execution, torture, sexual assault. There was no single signature, only chaos. It defied logic. Some experts even argued that it couldn't be one person, but one detective believed otherwise. He saw something others didn't, a thread connecting the madness. Weeks later, another attack, another home invasion, another elderly couple targeted. The husband killed instantly. The wife restrained, beaten, assaulted, but this time, she survived. And that changed everything, because now there was testimony. Not clear identification, but fragments. Behavior, words, presence. A glimpse into the mind behind the violence. He wasn't just killing. He was controlling, dominating, enjoying it. As April turned to May, the attacks escalated. Victims varied: young, old, male, female. There was no type, no safe group, no predictable pattern. Entire neighborhoods began to shift in mood. Doors were locked, windows sealed shut despite the heat. lights left on all night. People stopped trusting the dark. Because the attacks all shared one terrifying constant. They happened while victims slept. Then came something even more disturbing. Symbols. At one crime scene, investigators found markings tied to the occult. Pentagrams. Strange writing. Messages that suggested not just violence, but ideology. But who was he? That question would lead investigators far from Los Angeles to a border town in Texas. There, decades earlier, a boy had grown up in what seemed like an ordinary environment. His name was Richard Ramirez. He was not born into chaos, not raised in obvious violence. His family was poor, but stable. His neighborhood was typical kids playing outside, parents calling them home at sunset. To those who knew him, he was normal, friendly, funny, the kind of kid who made others laugh. Nothing about him suggested what he would become. But beneath that surface, cracks had already begun to form. As a child, he suffered from epilepsy, seizures that struck without warning. Moments where control disappeared. Moments where something in his brain misfired. Then came influence. A cousin older, experienced, dangerous. A Vietnam veteran. He didn't tell stories of heroism. He told stories of brutality. He showed photographs, violence, torture, death. And instead of recoiling, the boy watched, closely, curiously. Something inside him responded, not fear, fascination. One day, that fascination crossed a line. The cousin shot his own wife in front of him. No hesitation, no remorse, just a trigger pulled, and a life ended. For most, that moment would scar permanently. But for Ramirez, it planted something, a seed. As he grew older, the distance between him and normal life widened. He became withdrawn, detached, drawn toward darker influences, drugs, crime, rebellion. Eventually, he dropped out of school, left structure behind, and drifted. When he moved to California, that drift turned into something else. He lived on the margins. Skid Row. Addiction. Petty crime. Breaking into homes not just to steal, but to observe, to watch, to feel something. And slowly, almost inevitably, that behavior evolved. From intrusion to violation. From violation to murder. By May 1985, the transformation was complete. The Night Stalker was no longer forming. He had arrived, and Los Angeles was no longer a city. It was a hunting ground. Part 2. The Reign of Terror. By the summer of 1985, fear had taken hold of Los Angeles like a spreading fire. It wasn't just fear of crime, it was fear of the unknown. Because the Night Stalker didn't follow rules. He didn't choose victims based on logic. He didn't strike in predictable ways. He entered homes at night, silently, invisibly, and turned ordinary lives into nightmares. No one felt safe. Not anymore. People changed the way they lived. Windows stayed shut, even in suffocating heat. Doors were locked twice, sometimes 3 times. Gun sales surged. Dogs were bought for protection. Entire neighborhoods remained awake long after midnight. Because sleep had become dangerous. And still, the attacks continued. A woman assaulted while her child was locked away. Another found murdered, her body left as a message. Elderly victims beaten beyond recognition. Children not spared. Every new crime deepened the panic. Every headline amplified the terror. What made it worse was the randomness. There was no pattern of location, No consistent victim profile. One night, he would strike in a quiet suburb, the next miles away, in a completely different neighborhood. It felt like he was everywhere, watching, waiting. Even the investigators began to feel it. One detective woke in the middle of the night, convinced the killer was inside his own home. Gun in hand, he searched every room, cleared every corner, only to realize the fear had followed him home. But then came a break, not from evidence, from behavior. At several crime scenes, the killer had spoken. Words repeated, phrases remembered, patterns in language, if not in method. And slowly, investigators began to build a psychological profile. This wasn't just a killer. This was someone driven by power, by domination, by control. Someone who needed victims to feel fear, to submit, to acknowledge him. And then came escalation. He began attacking multiple victims in a single night, killing one, assaulting another, moving quickly, confidently, as if daring authorities to stop him. But behind the chaos, something else was forming. A trail, fingerprints, witness accounts, stolen vehicles, tiny fragments of identity, individually meaningless, together, powerful. In August 1985, everything changed. A fingerprint lifted from a stolen car. A match. A name. For the first time, the Night Stalker wasn't just a shadow. He was a person. Richard Ramirez. Authorities made a critical decision. They released his image to the public. And suddenly, the hunter became the hunted. Days later, Ramirez returned to Los Angeles, unaware that his face was everywhere. Newspapers, television. Everywhere he looked, he saw himself. And then someone recognized him. A single voice. It's him. That was all it took. He ran. Through streets, across yards, over fences, desperate, panicked. But this time, something was different. The city wasn't hiding anymore. It was fighting back. Citizens joined the chase, calling police, pointing directions, closing in, until finally, they caught him. Not detectives, not officers, ordinary people. When police arrived, they found him surrounded, bleeding, exhausted, and for the first time, no longer in control. In custody, Ramirez revealed something unexpected. He wasn't wild. He wasn't incoherent. He was calm, articulate, aware. He understood what he had done. And more disturbingly, he had studied it. He knew other killers, their methods, their histories, their legacy. He didn't just kill. He identified with it. In 1989, he was convicted. 13 murders, dozens of assaults, a trail of destruction that left an entire region scarred. He was sentenced to death. But even after his capture, one question remained. Why? Was he born this way? Or was he made? Some point to biology, brain chemistry, neurological damage. Others point to environment, violence, influence, exposure to brutality at a young age. The truth may lie somewhere in between. A combination, a convergence, perfect storm of factors that, together, created something rare and horrifying. Because not everyone exposed to darkness becomes it. But sometimes, someone does. And in 1985, Los Angeles learned that the hard way. The Night Stalker didn't just kill people. He changed behavior, changed trust. He changed how an entire city saw the night. And even now, decades later, his story remains a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters look like monsters at all.